Okay, in this unit of instruction, we're going to talk about Gardner Chapter 8, and he is going to be discussing crime scene notes and reports. And these are narrative descriptions. Ultimately, everything you do on a crime scene is going to be reduced to writing, and then it's going to be sent along with your photographs and sketches to the state attorney's office. The state attorney in turn is going to be reviewing your report along with the original report of investigation, and he or she is going to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to charge someone with a crime, and if so, what sort of crime they're going to be charged with. Now, what I'm going to offer you here is some of the variations that are often seen in a crime scene report. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to get into a great deal of depth and detail regarding how to write a law enforcement report. Those sort of subjects are best handled during the law enforcement writing report courses that normally take an entire term to complete. So with that, we'll begin. Our objective in this unit of instruction is to identify the three general attributes shared by crime scene notes and reports. We're going to explain how crime scene notes support the long-term investigation, and by long-term we could be talking cold case, because oftentimes complete notes can make or break a cold case investigation. And then finally, we're going to discuss the three negative attributes a crime scene report should not exhibit. Or in other words, what you shouldn't have. Now, crime scene reports come under the documentation phase of Gardner's 6 crime scene activities. And this is when you memorialize everything you've seen and everything you've done in the crime scene. Reports are typically going to be done while you're in the office, and more likely than not, they're going to be done on a computer. There are very few departments. In fact, I find it hard to find any department that is still using old school paper and pencil reports. Nowadays, chain of custody reports, evidence reports, narrative reports, and so forth are being typed up on a computer using a police record management system. Now, while your class may or may not have had such exposure to a police record management system, when you're in your advanced evidence documentation or any other law enforcement writing courses that I teach, you will be introduced to a record management system, so you understand what its limitations and assets are. Now, basically, there's two basic written documents that are created during the crime scene investigation. One is your notes, the other is your report. Of the two, your notes are going to be the most detailed and descriptive, and they should be, because you're going to be using this as the basis for your report. Your report is more of a synopsis, and I'll tell you why that is. As I mentioned before, your written product is going to end up on the desk of a state attorney who's going to be screening it and determining what charges they're going to charge the suspect with. When they're reading your report, they're also reading the reports of up to a dozen different agencies in a jurisdiction. So they're going to want a synopsis. They're not going to want a puffed up report. If it takes them too long to get through your report and determine what happened, chances are that report and that entire case is going to end up either being denied for a warrant, or it's going to be referred back for additional investigation, which usually means somebody's supervisor is going to get a telephone call, and then you're going to be called into the office. So your report should be a synopsis. It should not be a lengthy report that you've often seen in academic writing. All these narrative descriptions share three general attributes, and they are: the narrative is detailed, accurate, and understandable. All the pertinent details should be documented in that report. And I stress the word pertinent in this sentence. This is not the time to impress somebody on how flowery your writing can get. Get to the point, get to it quick, and move on. The narrative has to be accurate, because it's that accuracy that the defense attorney is going to look at. Because yes, the defense attorney will get a copy of your report, and he's going to be looking for any way he can impeach you as a witness. So if you identify the weather that night as being cloudy, and the weather service reports that it was really clear, you're going to have a problem. Lastly, the narrative has to be understandable. Anybody who reads that report has to be able to make sense of it. And we're talking people that may have only a 5th grade reading level, and that's about the average. According to the last research that I've read, your average juror has about a 5th grade reading level. Then investigative notes. These are prepared to create a contemporaneous record of the action taken at the scene. Now here's what that means. You're taking the notes exactly when the event happened or when the observation was made. By having notes that were taken as the action was performed or the observation was made, this makes them the most accurate, and therefore that makes your notes highly credible in court. Your notes are going to support everything else you do, your photographs and your sketches, and ultimately your report. They're also going to document not just anything you find, but things you don't find. Here's a little tip. What I've been hearing from fingerprint examiners and crime scene investigators all over the world, and especially all over the United States, is that they're not being called into court over what they saw. They're being called into court over what they didn't see and what they didn't find. Sometimes absence of evidence can be just as much of an indicator as presence of evidence. All right. The bottom line with crime scene reports is that if you didn't write it down in your report, it never happened. It may be included in your notes, but if it isn't documented on your crime scene report, it cannot be considered and will not be considered by the court. Therefore, your report has to be a standalone document. It has to stand on its own merits. Therefore, it should also be organized and understandable. This is, again, not the time for flowery prose and creative writing. This is the time for quickly and concisely documenting what you saw or didn't see, and do and didn't do. Typically, crime scene investigative reports are organized into functional parts, and this was often the case in Michigan, where I was from. In fact, the state police developed a report writing manual that considers this topical list. Your first part will be your introduction, which usually includes your dispatch information. Then there's your scene characteristics and scene conditions, environmental conditions, factors that are pertinent to entry and exit, scene documentation, search for latent prints, and then additional examinations such as blood stain pattern and firearm trajectory analysis. This is what a typical introduction looks like. For example, between 1400 and 2335 hours on January 10, 2001, Detectives Smith and Hansen conducted an examination of a homicide located at, and this is when you document your address. You document, typically most agencies want to see documentation of street address, city, mailing address if it's pertinent, county, and state. This establishes venue and then helps the state attorney determine what circuit and what district this case is going to be heard in. After the introduction, or as some agencies call it, the information, then you want to document the scene characteristics, such as this example down here. Apartment 3A is located in a fourplex brick apartment building. If there's any trim color, I would include that too. The apartment is located on the northwest corner, and here we're missing some street names, and consists of 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a living room, and a kitchen. There is a single door entering the living room from the north wall. After that, we talk about the scene conditions. And this describes just what you saw. Was it clean? Was it ransacked? And so forth. For example, there is a white male approximately 20 to 25 years old laying in a prone position in the center of the living room. His right hand is extended up and towards the northwest, palm down. Left hand is beneath his body. Then there's another heading where you mention environmental conditions. And this is where you indicate, for example, the exterior temperature was 52 degrees. The apartment thermostat was set at 88 degrees and the interior conditions were dry and hot. This may have some bearing as to what you're going to see in your case. If you're in a hot and dry interior environment, you would expect to see perhaps some partially mummified remains. And this is going to be one of those details that the defense is going to try to latch on to. They may ask you, well, my client was mummified, yet we live in a human environment. How is that? And that's how you explain it. Another heading is factors pertinent to entry and exit. And this is where you describe doors, windows, and other access points. And this may require you to put some facts together. Here's an example. There's a single entry door to the apartment. The locking mechanism was a standard deadbolt, showing no evidence of prior damage. The door was locked. So that becomes a very pertinent fact. If you have someone inside who's dead, the door was locked, and there's no sign of damage. That may indicate that either the person may have ended up dying due to natural causes. Next heading is scene documentation. This is where you describe what you did inside the particular scene. Here's an example. Rough crime sketch was prepared by Detective Smith, as well as an evidence measurement log. Photographs were exposed to the scene by Detective Hansen using, in our case, a Canon digital single lens reflex camera using a 18 to 80 zoom lens. You may also want to make a reference to your photo log at this point. Evidence collection. This is where things get a little bit different. In a number of agencies that utilize a police record management system, you may have to take notes and then enter it into your record management system. And this is going to depend based upon your agency's practices. If not, you may want to consider having a separate discussion. You'll put in, for an example, between 1917 and 2200, the following items were recovered. 4 latent prints recovered from the coffee tabletop surface. 1 beverage can marked Fresca found on the coffee tabletop surface, and so forth. In other words, you describe the evidence that you've located, where you located it from. You'll also do a separate heading for latent print search, and this will describe your on-scene fingerprint recovery techniques. For example, you can say that you did a brush and powder examination of a particular area. You could say that an item was fumed with cyanoacrylate. You can say that a laser or alternate light source was used to search for latent evidence, or I'm sorry, latent fingerprint evidence. And then you would you would indicate the results of that search in this particular heading. Following that, there's additional examinations, such as bloodstain pattern, trajectory, casting, and so forth. And you may have to break these down into subsections, such as additional examination, tool mark casting, additional examination, footwear casting, and so forth. Finally, we come to some of the negative attributes of scene reports. These are things you want to avoid. The crime scene report should never be used to make a discussion of central theme items and no other details. It's the details that end up with the additional charges. Another thing the crime scene report should never be used for is a rambling discussion of why the suspect's guilty or why he had to commit the crime. That's not your call. That's the sort of thing that's generally left to the forensic psychologist, and unfortunately, forensic psychology has not progressed to the point where it can be relied upon as evidence. So don't get yourself involved in editorializing. Don't put in opinion, merely document what you saw. And then lastly, make a one-sided description of evidence that supports a single theory. Just because it doesn't fit your hypothesis doesn't mean it's not evidence. Let me give you a case example. In the area that I used to work in, there was an individual by the name of Claude McCollum. Mr. McCollum was a suspect in a rape and murder at a local community college. Evidence was found that showed that McCollum did not commit the crime, or exculpatory evidence. However, the prosecuting attorney decided to suppress that information. This ended up with a lot of people losing their jobs, a city paying a lot of money in damages, and Claude McCollum getting set free, while somebody else was allowed to evade capture. So, if you see it, document it. Now, what I've just described may vary depending on where you find yourself located, but this is a basic generic method of how to complete a crime scene report. If you have any additional questions, certainly reference the chapter on crime scene report in Gardner, or ask your instructor.